Put your seatbelts on, Jets fans. Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey are officially here. Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Monday, January 27th, and Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey just wrapped up their introductory press conference out at One Jets Drive in Florham Park. And today, we are going to break down all angles of this press conference, what was said from Aaron Glenn, what was said from Darren Mougey, my biggest takeaways, even some things as well from Woody Johnson. We will break it all down in today's episode 479 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. I thank you all so much for reaching 500 subscribers. Next up, getting to that big 1,000 mark. So make sure to continue to like and subscribe. As always, thank you to those of you tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms where this podcast can be found. And it's a new era. It's officially the start of a new era as Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey had their introductory press conference this afternoon, just a little bit ago, out at One Jets Drive, 1JD in Florham Park. And I don't want to waste any time. I want to dive right into it. Here is Aaron Glenn's message to Jets fans that has everybody already fired up on day number one.
Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. Listen, there are going to be some challenges, but with challenges becomes opportunity, gets opportunity. But here's what I do know. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this.
It's a powerful message. That's a message that's going to get Jets fans fired up. And look, before we get into the nitty-gritty and some of the Rodgers stuff and some of the roster building stuff and other comments that were made this afternoon from Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey, I do want to just bring this up. This was a very good press conference for Glenn and Mougey. This was a very good press conference specifically for Aaron Glenn, who you could tell today just the amount of questions that was put his way, even in the post-media scrums that were put his way. He is kind of the face of this thing. While they are working together in a partnership, it really is Glenn that's going to be making a lot of these decisions and really leading this way and trying to get this franchise back on track. But you could still be happy and excited coming out of today's press conference. It feels like, and 100%, they did win the press conference today. That does not mean everything, because we've seen in the past, right? Robert Saleh, we were all fired up after his press conference. Adam Gase was the complete opposite. You knew from the start that it was going to be a disaster, but you can at least come away from today excited and ready to rally around this new regime. Whether or not it is going to work out, we have no idea. We have no clue. No matter who the hire was going to be, at the end of the day, it's all about putting wins out there, having success. Glenn mentioned it a lot today, having sustained success for the fan base to truly buy in. But there's always hope. And I think you walk away today having hope. You walk away today that hopefully they finally got it right. You walk away today liking Aaron Glenn's message, loving that 14-second clip that I just played for you, where he's been a Jet before. He played for this team for 8 years. He saw the turnaround from Rich Kotite to Bill Parcells. He's mentioned it a ton today, a couple times today, how this was the job that he wanted. This is where he wants to be. I'll play you a clip here about exactly what I'm saying right now, wanting to be a Jet, starting his career here and having a long tenure now as a head coach, hopefully coming up. And I've said this a lot. There is really something to say about that. There really is something about former players coaching their teams that they played for, understanding the organization as a player, having success as a player. He also spent 2 years, of course, as a scout, where he got his after football career started, and now he's back. Here was Glenn just on wanting the Jets over anybody else, which has been clear now for the last couple years, and especially during this cycle.
Listen, I want this job. I interviewed for a number of them, but I wanted this job. When I was going to my second interview, I wanted to make sure this is going to be the second interview. It's going to be the first of the second interviews, because I didn't want to leave the building without shaking Woody's hand and make sure we had a contract. So I'm just telling you now, everything else was really out of it. It was all about the Jets, and it's been that way from the beginning. The organization, we've already talked. I respect every little thing that you do, because this is bigger than me. It's going to take us all. It's going to take us all to accumulate wins. And I look forward to working with you.
So there was Glenn on wanting this job. So you got that excited, pumped up 14-second clip. We're the New York Jets. Let's go. We're built for this. And then you get him wanting the Jets. I wanted this to be my first, second interview. I wanted to walk out of this building shaking Woody Johnson's hand with a contract done. I didn't want to go anywhere else. I wanted this job. And there's truly something to say about that. Whether that's the Miko Ryans in Houston, we're seeing him have success. He was a former player. Even Jim Harbaugh at the Chargers, former player. Dan Campbell, who Glenn just came from, he saw a former player from the Lions turn around that organization where they are in very similar spots. The Lions were a dumpster fire. The Jets right now, coming out of last season, dumpster fire, and you've got to turn it around. And having that experience, it's certainly got to give you some positivity and some hope. So there is some of the fired up Aaron Glenn winning the fan base over type of quotes from today's press conference. He also talked a little bit about the 1998 AFC title game against the Denver Broncos, losing that game, and kind of mentioning how he's back here now, full circle moment. He wants revenge. He talked about his whole career. It's kind of boiled inside of him, that loss and not being able to finish that job, and now being able to come back as a head coach and finishing what feels kind of like unfinished business from that 1998 team where he was, of course, there as a player, a Pro Bowl season that he had in 97 and 98. So there is that aspect of it as well, which I think can certainly fire you up. So there's the exciting parts of Aaron Glenn's press conference today as we kind of break down each section of today's press conference. That was the excitement. That was the fired up. That was like the adrenaline rush stuff that even if you don't love the hire, even if he wasn't the top choice, which was where I'm at, right? Wasn't my top choice. I preferred experience. But those are the type of quotes. Those are the type of things that do give you hope for this franchise and make you really want to root for a guy like Aaron Glenn to get this thing turned around. Now, I got to get right into the Aaron Rodgers stuff. And I'll be honest, I really like the way that Aaron Glenn approached after the, thanking everybody and all that stuff. He gets right into basically the elephant in the room, which is Aaron Rodgers. And I actually kind of like that out of Aaron Glenn, getting right to the point. Here was Glenn, his first statement on Rodgers. Then the clip after, there's going to be a little bit more on Rodgers on a question that was asked from Rich Cimini. We'll talk a little bit about it. And then there was another quote from Glenn that I want to talk about that I really kind of like his view and his message on Rodgers and this roster as a whole. So here are some of his key quotes.
Just a couple of things I want to nip in the bud before we get to the Q&A. Listen, I came on Wednesday. Well, I got the job on Wednesday. Mougey came and got the job on Saturday. And we came here on Sunday, and we started talking. Here's what I do know. Aaron Rodgers will be talked about. It will be talked about. We've already texted that communication with Aaron Rodgers. And as we continue to look at the roster, we'll make decisions accordingly. And that's with a number of people, right, on the team.
Yeah. A question for Aaron. Since you brought it up a moment ago, with Aaron Rodgers, what is going to be your process as a coach to determine if he's going to be your quarterback next year?
Well, me and Mougey is going to sit and talk and just go over the whole roster. And I will tell you now, that's going to be the answer to a number of questions when it comes to the roster in general. So we're looking forward to that process. I can't tell you how long that process will be. But the thing is, we're going to make sure we get the right answer. And we're not going to rush to this answer. We're going to get the right answer.
So there's the first two clips there on Glenn. Something interesting, already talked about, texted, has had some conversation, has had communication with Rodgers since taking over the job. So there's obviously got to be a clear sense of where Rodgers stands right now with his career. I'm sure Glenn has a sense of that, Mougey as well. And I'm also sure Glenn and Mougey themselves also hold a pretty clear whether or not they want him back. So those are just some of the bigger takeaways from those two quotes. But this next quote, this next play, I think Glenn does a really good job, in my opinion, here of kind of breaking down the Rodgers decision and giving his perspective, basically saying he's one of 53 guys and they're going to treat him like one of 53 guys. And I think that's important from where Rodgers and how he was treated his first 2 years in the building, where they basically catered to everything he wanted. So here was Glenn on Rodgers, the decision in the post-media scrums with the beat reporters.
Aaron, what will your process be like? Will you go meet with Aaron? I know you guys.
Listen, we've already texted Aaron, and me and Mougey are going to sit there and we're going to watch every game tape there is, and then we're going to look at the whole roster. This thing is not about Aaron Rodgers, folks. This is about the roster, and we plan on building the best roster that we can. So whatever that may be, guard, tackle, defensive tackle, that's what we're evaluating. And listen, everybody's under the microscope. That's just what it is. So we're going to do the best we can to make sure we build the best roster.
This thing is not about Aaron Rodgers. It's about everybody. It's about the roster. I really like that message from Aaron Glenn. You think about what the Jets have done over the first 2 years of the Aaron Rodgers tenure here, right? They bring in Nathaniel Hackett. They bring in Alan Lazard. They did pretty much everything. It took forever for them to then demote Nathaniel Hackett, or whether it was even Randall Cobb. They brought in so much of Aaron Rodgers' buddies, so many guys that had connections with Aaron Rodgers. Heck, Billy Turner, right? They brought him in there, Green Bay. There was so many connections that the Jets had that they catered to Aaron Rodgers his first 2 seasons. And it blew up in their face because you can't do that in NFL locker room. You can't. Everybody plays a role. You can't go out there and build your roster based off of what one guy in the building wants. And I like that message from Aaron Glenn basically saying, look, he's a big piece, of course, but he's one of 53. There's a whole lot of other guys we've got to evaluate. There's a lot of other important pieces on this roster. It's not just about Aaron Rodgers. It's not just about making sure that Aaron Rodgers feels comfortable here and is happy here. It's not about that. It's about the team. It's about everybody else. And that's gone lost in the shuffle over the last 2 seasons, where everything the Jets did was basically catered to Aaron Rodgers. And that's not how you build a winning team. And we saw that last year. I like that message from Glenn. It's about everybody. It's about the team. Yeah, Rodgers is a big deal. Yeah, it's a lot of, there's a lot of tension, a lot of media. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of other issues, and there's a lot of other players on this team that need to be addressed. And there's a lot of other decisions that the Jets are going to need to make. And there's a lot of other talent on this team that needs to be evaluated and attention and needs to, you need to build around and all that stuff. It's not all about Rodgers and catering to him and making sure everything's okay and holding his hand. No. I think it's also, look, in a slight way, it's like, look, if Rodgers wants to come here, he's going to need to learn a new system. He's already got a new coaching staff. You're not going to have all of his buddies here. It's the way it is. You need some of that tough love. That's where you're at this point. So I really like that message there from Glenn. Some of other things that Glenn had to say on just the team and things like that before we get into some Darren Mougey stuff, because I do believe I've hit on all of my Aaron Glenn clips that I've had so far. Just some other quotes, some other things that I took away. Glenn talked about he will not call plays on defense. Said he wants to be the best head coach, oversee everything. That's the right decision. That's smart. Obviously, Glenn feels like over the next couple days, we'll start to see the staff being hired. It's so important to see who is on Aaron Glenn's staff. It feels like Steve Wilks is probably the front runner right now for that defensive coordinator job, which I think would be a really strong hire. Not only do I think Wilks is a good defensive coordinator, but he's got previous head coaching experience. And I think it's pivotal for Glenn and Mougey as well, building some of the front office roles, to have a guy in that front office that can be not, kind of a mentor, a voice of reason, a guy that can, help them through this process here as two first timers. So really important, but that was Glenn on not calling plays on defense. I also think it too, you look at, I always say like McVay with the Rams, right? He had Wade Phillips on his defensive side of the football as his defensive coordinator, former coach Wade Phillips, tons of NFL experience. That was a guy that McVay could kind of rely on. I do think Glenn having Wilks would be good, but I also think it would be helpful too to have somebody on the offensive side of the football with proven experience, maybe a former coach, or even just a guy that's maybe been around for a while that can help and kind of, help things on the offense side of the football. Of course, Glenn's side, that he's not his strong suit, of course, being a defensive-minded coach. So I do think look for that as well, just the importance on the staff. Some quotes that I took away, right? Culture is about getting the right people in the building. That was some of the things that he's learned from Parcells. I really liked, and we've all really liked, the connection he has with Parcells, brought up Parcells a couple times. I really hope and really think that that can be something that helps Glenn. Parcells kind of being like a right-hand man to him, kind of being a mentor to him throughout his career. Now, they talk all the time. Parcells actually told some reporters about his thoughts on Glenn getting hired last week. And he obviously has drawn rave reviews. So I think that's something that's really, really important. While Parcells, of course, isn't on the staff, I do think he's a guy that's going to be a critical piece in helping Glenn as a head coach behind the scenes. So that was one of his quotes. I also liked one of these other quotes from Glenn that I pulled out. Smartest teams win games, small things win games. I think that's really crucial. And I think that's a good message, because how many times last year did we talk about how much talent this Jets team has? How many times are we talking about it even now, how much talent this Jets team has? But yet it's the small things that lost them games last year. It's the dumb plays, the stupid penalties, right? And I really like that message from Glenn. And I think that kind of also gets into the whole accountability thing. Like, the smartest teams win games. Yeah. Don't stop. You got to eliminate those stupid penalties. You got to eliminate the boneheaded mistakes. You got, it's also, of course, the small stuff as well, right? Missing field goals, going to kill you in games. Call Craig Zerline last year. How many times last year did the Jets do so many little things wrong? Like, there was so many games where the Jets were basically death by 1,000 paper cuts, whether it was a missed field goal, whether there was a million reasons, missed field goals, penalties, whether those were pre-snap penalties or penalties during plays, drops, turnovers, defense blowing games late, bad coaching, clock management, offense not being able to do things late. I mean, miscommunications in offense, right? Whether you want to go back to the whole Mike Williams, Aaron Rodgers red line thing, there was so many things that went wrong last year. So many different problems. So many. And I think that quote is a good thing to kind of carry into this new regime. Playing smart. Those teams win games. The small things win games. Jets learned that the hard way last year. You can have all the talent in the world. You could have a future Hall of Fame quarterback. If you're not smart, if you're not well coached, if you're not doing the little things correctly, you're going to have no success. And sure enough, what did they do? They went 5-12. His viewpoint on accountability feels accountability comes from responsibility, right? Understanding your job. And if you're not doing that correctly, then that's where, as a coach, you've got to go in and hold them accountable and let that player know what they're doing wrong. And if they continue to do it wrong, of course, you got to make them pay for it. That's what this team needs, a hard-nosed leader. And I think we'll really understand the whole accountability thing, in my opinion. you're going to find out pretty quickly Aaron Glenn's level of accountability based on games and during the season and even during training camp. You're going to get a good idea with penalties and stuff like that. You're going to get a good idea. Accountability is really something that you have to kind of wait and see. You could talk all about accountability. You really don't know how well a coach is holding players accountable until, the season and actual games start to happen. And if you seeing repeated mistakes happen, that's when you know. So hopefully for Glenn, that mantra, that motto is something that can get through to this locker room. Talked about his trust in Woody, and I hope that's the other way around too. Again, we'll get to Woody here in a second and some of the things he had to say today. You just hope, right? Woody knows him as a player, knows him as a scout. You really hope that this is something where Woody can, have trust in him and let him and Mougey just do their jobs and stay away and get your nose out of it. Please. So hopefully that's the case. Again, talked a lot about sustained success, right? Wanting sustained success and not only building a winner this year. Mougey and Glenn both sounded pretty clear on winning now. And I do think that's a message that I think is a little bit different than Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas's message back in 2021. I do think that's something that differs. If you go back to the press conference back then, and even you go back to their first year with the Jets, right? Douglas and Saleh, all they talked about was, Douglas said it himself, they were inheriting an expansion team and all of these different things and how it's going to be a long process. Saleh, I remember, even said in his press conference, it's going to take time, right? I do think the difference, and it's also, I think, that some of the talent that's on this roster now is obviously a lot better than, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. But I do kind of like that message today that, winning and even Glenn, right? Or Mougey said it in the post-media scrums, expect winning. And Glenn even said it in his statement that he made after he got the job a couple days ago, right? Simply put, we're going to put a winning for whatever it is. Like, I know it's all talk right now, but just differ from the previous regime that was here. Douglas and Saleh, all they always talked about was the process. And they always talked about, how far the roster has come and how it's going to take time and all that stuff. I feel like there's kind of a difference in viewpoint now, or difference in whatever you want to call it now with Glenn and Mougey, kind of understanding like, look, we got to win. Rebuilds don't take 5 years. Rebuilds don't take 14 years. You shouldn't go almost a decade without a winning season. That shouldn't happen. NFL sports in general, but especially the NFL, because we've seen this recently now, you can turn a season around in 1 year. Look at the Washington Commanders. They went 4-13 to an NFC title game. Look at the Houston Texans. You couldn't pay people to go to that stadium in 2022. What did they do? They've won 2 playoff games in the last 2 years. They've gone to the divisional round back-to-back years, and they're only getting better. Look at the Detroit Lions. It took 2 years, but in year 2, they saw a major jump, and now back-to-back years, they've gone to the playoffs. Chargers, 1 year, boom, in the playoffs. There's so many examples. You want to look at the Eagles when Sirianni took over. Year 1, they were in the playoffs. So we've seen this so many times now. I always talk about that 2022 draft class, right? Out of the top 5 of that draft class, all of those teams except the Jets have made the playoffs since. Doesn't take years to rebuild. And I think there is a kind of an understanding amongst Glenn and Mougey that I don't think Douglas and Saleh had, which is winning now, understanding where this fan base is at, understanding the talent that's on this roster, and not having this thing take 3 to 4 years. Not having 4 years from now, when Glenn's contract's almost up, figuring out where this team's going to be, figuring out whether or not to hold on to him when this team's on 17th or 18th year of this drought. No, none of that nonsense anymore. Go out there and win 10 games next year and make the playoffs. None of this 4 and 5 win bull crap in year 1 and then give us false hope in year 2 as to why everyone should believe. No. Go out there and win next year. Go out there and make the playoffs. Go out there and win a playoff game. That's the expectation. That should be what it is now. So just some stuff there on some final thoughts there on Glenn and this team. All right, let's move on to Darren Mougey. Here was Mougey, his opening statement. And I also want to get into some things on Mougey that he had to say today about the roster and some feelings on some of his other quotes. Much more of a heavier Glenn day, of course, as he was the focal point. But here was Mougey.
It is one of the greatest honors and privileges of my life to be named General Manager of the New York Jets. This is a proud franchise with great tradition and incredibly passionate fans located in one of the most iconic cities in the world. I could not be more excited to take on this responsibility with AG as we work to build a championship team that will make the Jets fans proud.
So that was Mougey's opening statement. And I also hear his Mougey on the roster and some of my takeaways on how he views this roster and how that could impact some key decisions that are looming.
When you look, obviously a lot of these GM jobs open because the teams weren't very good. When you look at this roster, do you see kind of an exception to that when you have as many young foundational pieces on both lines and playmakers as you have?
I do. I felt that very much so. It's a talented roster here, and we're going to continue to add to it.
And that's something I felt like was probably one of my bigger takeaways. Again, Mougey only got asked one question in the opening or in the press conference itself. Obviously, in the media scrums off to the side after the press conference, there was a lot more questions being asked. Again, though, it was just a big Aaron Glenn day, which is normal. Aaron Glenn's kind of the face of this thing. He talked about it. He did talk about it when he was up there at the podium, how he feels really good about the foundation of players in this building. He talked about it there, right? How this job was appealing, wanting this job because of the talent that was on this roster. And I kind of just get the feeling from Mougey and even Glenn itself. And I think this ties into the winning thing and trying to win, soon here and not talking so much about the process and how it's going to take time and all that stuff. No, expecting success right away. And as Glenn put it, expecting sustained success. But I do feel like some of those comments made and the talent that they're talking about, it feels like these are guys, if you read between the lines, you're not going to get any of these crazy blockbuster trades, in my opinion, where you're going to sell off one of these core pieces. I don't get that sense, nor would that be smart. I think there's been a lot of Jet fans that say, oh, do you trade Garrett Wilson? Do you trade a Breece Hall? No. And I think you hear these guys speak, and you especially hear from Mougey talking about adding to it. Like, I think these guys are two guys that would want to keep Garrett Wilson here long-term and work out an extension, which I think should be priority number one. Once you get the Rodgers situation fixed and figured out, I think priority number one, calling Garrett Wilson and saying, look, we want you to be a Jet. How much do you want? And that's what I would do. And I feel like that's kind of the message you got. None of this tear down, rebuild nonsense. No, work with what you've got here, add to it, and go build a winning team from the start. So it ties into there my last point of Aaron Glenn as well. They also both talked a lot about, and the one question that Mougey was asked was, just the we collaboration and how everybody's going to be involved. And something that Mougey actually has been known for during his time in Denver. And this has even been talked about here recently. And even today, I think it was brought up. And I think one of his quotes that he had in the media scrums, he talked about how, they're not always going to agree on things, but ultimately, they're going to come to a decision, do what's best. And that's actually something that Mougey got applauded for in Denver. You hear some of what Denver's reporters and people around there have to say about him is he wasn't opposed to sharing an opposite opinion. He was kind of, he was in his own feet. He was in his own, mind, and whatever he felt was best, he would explain it, even if it kind of went against what everybody was for. And, he even, with Peyton, George Patton and all those guys over there, he wasn't afraid to go against him. He wasn't afraid to explain his opinion, even if it wasn't what most people there felt was the best thing to do or felt was the decision to be made. And I think that's actually something that Sean Payton liked about him. Sean Payton reportedly really liked that about him, how he wasn't afraid to share his feelings on things, even if it went against the group, even if it went against where everybody else stood on things. And you actually even heard that too with Mougey. He actually wanted Kevin O'Connell for that head coaching job. And sure enough, they all went and got Hackett. So maybe it'll be a good thing that he's got some separate opinions on things that that could maybe potentially be a positive here as opposed to just going with the group. So that was the Mougey stuff. Couple quick quotes there. As for Woody Johnson, as we start to kind of wind down here, Woody Johnson did speak to some reporters today after doing his, introducing the two of those guys. This was one of the bigger takeaways. This was from Connor Hughes earlier today. Woody Johnson says the Jets will return to their old reporting structure. Head coach and GM both report to Woody. Neither is the boss of the other. Again, kind of that collective effort type thing. Connor Hughes also mentioned, and we've all known this, the Jets changed things with Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. Saleh reported to Douglas, and Douglas reported to Johnson. So Douglas was essentially Saleh's boss. That's not the case anymore. Feels like that way too with Glenn getting hired first. It's kind of Glenn, Mougey, they're together. They report to Woody. That's the reporting structure. That's how it used to be. Woody said again, he has said it now a couple times. We've heard reports about this. He talked to Costello on a one-on-one with the New York Post about this as well. And he said it today with his own words that he will not voice opinion on Aaron Rodgers' decision. It'll be up to Darren Mougey and Aaron Glenn. Which is the way it should be. The two people you hire, those are the football people. They should be making the football decisions. That's the way it should be. Step away, Woody. Here's one final quote. I have to look in the mirror and be a better owner. That's what Woody Johnson said today. So I'll believe it when I see it. Look, just step away. Don't get your nose in anything. Don't meddle. Let Mougey, let Glenn do what they're paid to do what they're being brought here to do. Step back and let them make the decisions. We've seen it with James Dolan. We've seen it in this city. James Dolan did it with the Knicks. And he stepped back. He's letting Leon Rose and the basketball people make the basketball decisions. And look at where the Knicks are right now. It's where the Jets need to be. Step away. Let Glenn and Mougey do their thing. And hopefully it translates to success. Because you getting your nose into everything is only going to make it worse, especially with two first-time guys. All right, so that'll do it. Episode 479 here in the books. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below about Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey's press conference this afternoon. What are some of your biggest takeaways? We'll have a lot more content. I'm sure there will be a little bit more fallout and a little bit more quotes and some other stuff too that'll come out, I'm sure, as the day goes on here that we could probably talk about here over the next couple days. You'll also hear a lot more about the staff starting to really assemble. We'll get an Aaron Rodgers answer. I feel like we'll probably get a Rodgers answer here relatively soon, or at least you'll start to really hear pretty heavy reports that they're going to want him back, not want him back, wherever they seem to be on that type of thing. So we'll discuss all that. Stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. Next Monday as well, we'll really start to ramp up our mock draft Mondays. Last 2 weeks didn't do any just because of, with everything going on, all the news. There was a lot of GM search stuff last week. You had the introductory press conference this week. So we'll get more into draft coverage next week and really ramp that up as well, really up until April. So stay tuned for that. Off season's here. We know the drill. It's the Jets, really their regular season. So we're starting off with a bang. So that'll do it. Appreciate you all so much. Until next time, Jets, Jets, Jets.